could gently ask everybody to take their seats, please.
Find your seat and put it in a chair.
Yeah. You're live, just so you know, Ms. Walsh.
Oh, thanks. Did you see me straightening it out too?
So we'll start by doing our quick around the room. We'll start, Mr. Trainee, if you would be so kind to introduce yourself.
Chief Trainee, sound like
I'll be great, Jack.
Phil Evans.
Eric Croft.
Pete Peterson. Patrick Flynn on the phone. On the phone.
Hi, Amy DeBossi.
Thank you, Amy. And Mr. Steele?
Yes, Tim Steele there.
Thank you. Come on up. So Forrest.
Laura Brown, Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Brookings.
Jim Jager, support.
Karen Hall, support.
Go ahead, Deb.
Devin Kelly, Media.
Rose Gully, Assembly Budget Analyst.
We introduced everybody, sorry.
Judd Smith, Public Transit Advisory Board.
Welcome. And
Chris Shooty, speaking off the speed of
great. Well, thanks, everybody. Hopefully you've had a chance to at least read through the administration's proposal. We had some tasks coming out of the last meeting, almost none of which got accomplished. Not to cast aspersions. But I would like to sort of talk through those, so I actually kept notes, and raise a couple other issues and get a general feel for where folks want to go on some of these. The first is, Mr. Croft, we had discussed a 2008 GEO bond providing some preference from municipality. Are you still inclined to try and add that to our plan?
Yeah, and I'm maybe the poster child for not having done what I committed to do for the last meeting, so I apologize, and I am prepared to re-promise again. But yeah, I think it needs to be on there. I think for the state, if we don't do capital for really 4 or 5 years, we're going to kill an industry, a couple of industries, and there's unlikely to be GF for significant capital. So the only way you get there is GEO. And it's also, I think, going to the municipal league, where it kind of got phrased as Anchorage wants its port, and we all know it's the state's port, but some people don't see it that way in other parts. And that's why they're talking about GEO, sort of started the conversation wrong. So I would like to flip it around and say GEO, for GEO's for building capital for all the reasons, and you guys will have your projects in it. And then, when it comes time to what is our project going to be, it's likely to be the port. But I think it got sold as port, so GEO, I want to sell it as GEO, and by the way, port.
So my inclination on that is to sort of add that to the priority capital request section, pages 2 and 3.
Right.
And just have a new line item saying that, the municipality of Anchorage supports a statewide GEO bond for the 2018 ballot that supports capital projects throughout the state of Alaska.
So do you want me to just put some language under that?
Yeah.
Great.
And Ona, I want you taking notes, because if you guys want to structure it differently, I'm willing to listen to reason, but I'm pretty smart about this.
Modestly said, but good.
So, another one we had was the discussion of property tax exemptions. Mr. Dunbar, that appears to be more or less captured on page 5, remove unfunded mandatory property tax exemptions.
So,
And the idea is those then become responsible, we become responsible for, once they're authorized, whether we grant them or not.
yeah, so I guess I would hesitate to phrase it this way, to say remove, because we're not actually asking to remove them. We're asking to remove the requirement, that makes sense. Or I would say, make optional or return control to municipality, localize. How about localized property tax exemption, something like that.
Okay.
So use a word that doesn't imply that we're going to immediately get rid of the veterans exemption, disabled veterans exemption.
You want to reword this paragraph, or just 2 paragraphs? You want to do it
Is
now?
it 2 or is it just 1?
Well, it's.
Oh, I see.
it's 1 item, 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, let me think a little bit about that.
We don't have to do it today, I just want to make sure we have some clear marching orders when we're doing locking out here.
Sure.
Ray Jackson, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We could phrase it in the same way that the fire sprinkler exemption is phrased.
On the previous page,
Yeah.
it becomes local
Well,
option.
yeah, that's how we should
Remove
phrase it.
remove
Yeah.
mandatory.
Yeah.
But that's the way we are phrasing it, is remove mandatory property taxes, remove unfunded mandatory. Now, I agree, maybe making it,
So can we change it to localize instead of making
Yeah,
a move?
absolutely. But,
Better
but we,
capture the rest of the
but the
time.
text needs to reflect that if
Right.
we want it to be local option, it needs to say we want it to be local option.
Yeah, absolutely.
and then on the related idea there that you and I had talked about a little, I don't know whether it belongs.
I think it's a separate line item, go ahead.
Yeah, so if they didn't do that, would you please state, make our 50,000 up to some other number, 100,000? So either pop all of the requirements, or if you can't see your way to doing that, give us more room to go from 50 to 100.
And that's the owner occupied, property tax exemption. Ms. Ray
Thank
Jackson.
you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is this, are we sure that the state agreed to 50,000? Because I remember when Harry was on the Senate that we did a resolution asking them to, and I texted Senator Lukowski, and he doesn't, he's researching it, but he doesn't remember that happening.
Ms. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I
Okay,
sponsored that.
he just texted me.
I believe that passed.
Yeah,
so-
if I may, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I just got a text, in 2012.
Yeah, we didn't do it.
I know, but I didn't remember it even happening at the state level.
Yeah,
I'm glad it is there, but anyway, thank you.
I remember you and Mr. Carey working on that. Mr. Trainee?
I just wanted to thank Pete for actually passing it and getting it approved in June. Thank you, Pete.
So it kind of went under the radar evidently.
Evidently.
Okay, couple other items.
So do you, is that on my task list to write a separate one to take it to 100? You don't want it in this for us?
I think it needs to be a separate line item, and and yes, that's on your list. I have Mr. Evans down for a school bond reimbursement, discussion, but I thought I saw that, no. I don't think it's in there, is it?
Oh.
So, you still wanna do that?
I don't remember ever expressing any indication of ever doing that.
You weren't here when we signed you up.
I'm pretty sure you said you wanted to, ask them to reinstate it.
No, I've never said that.
All right, then you're off the hook. Mr. Trainee, I have you down for the, lottery.
Don't let the state deal with that on their own.
All right, yes, yeah, fair enough, that's fine. Okay, so this is the most complicated matter, and,
Thank you.
and I'm gonna tread into this conversation gently. There is a long history, and Mr. Croft knows part of it, about how we manage service area consolidation within the Valley Bankers. That's why I'm going gently. And the trooper reduction along Turnagain Arm has, I guess, refreshed that discussion. This dates back to the 90s, when the Anchorage Police Service area was extended to include the hillside. There was a public vote, and it passed fairly easily area-wide. It failed in the area to which the police service area is being extended, that primarily being the hillside. The court found that the area-wide, the service area-wide vote was the prevailing factor, and therefore the hillside now has APD coverage and pays taxes on that specific mill levy line item. We have now, with the troopers reducing the coverage of Turnagain Arm, and Girdwood voting themselves into creating their own little police service area, a gap between Hugh Creek and Girdwood. So, our ability as a municipality to extend service down Turnagain Arm is hampered by that legislation which passed subsequent that requires approval of both the greater service area and the individual service area 6 years get approved. Mr. Cheney, you wanna jump in here?
Here's my Senator Con Bundy. To
Well,
stop us from
ultimately it
bringing
was.
more areas.
It was started with, it was Representative Tom Bundy and Senator Parnell, and then it was Senator Bundy and Mr. Parnell was out of office, and then finally it was vetoed by Governor Knowles and ultimately signed by
That's part of the problem we
Governor
have.
Murkowski.
Glenn, with part of the area that's not in our Parks and Rec.
Right.
Because
So-
unless they vote to come in, we vote to bring them, it won't happen.
So I wanna be very sensitive about this, particularly, Ms. Domboski, you're on the line too, because this would affect.
Oh, I'm listening. I almost objected already because I didn't know where you were going.
Well, and I want to be thoughtful about this, because Mr. Falsey's got his hand up already. I'm not trying to say that all of Anchorage needs to be one service area, but we have a situation where we have a difficulty in addressing turning an arm. Partly, not
And
entirely.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Flynn? Are you focusing your service area on police, area-wide police?
Well, that's the issue at hand, and Mr. Falsey's probably gonna say, well, there is no service area along Tourniquet Arm, but I'll let him do that. But we lack an ability to, we are hindered in our ability to address that because of the current state statutory structure. So I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Falsey, who has probably more insight than I.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that, that story is correct, except as to police. So very strangely, in the wake of the Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court held the notion of dissolving the existing police service area and replacing it with a larger police service area, the statute that the legislature actually passed applies only to roads, fire, and parks. So it now reads, if the voters reside in a service area that provides road, fire protection from parks and recreation services, abolishment of that service area is subject to the majority of the voters, et cetera, et cetera. And it cannot be abolished and replaced by a larger service area unless it's approved separately by a majority of voters who are voting on the question residing in the existing service area and the majority of those who would be. So the old Maestrom trick of expanding the police service area by dissolving the old one and creating a new one is theoretically still available to the municipality for police services.
Roads, parks, and what?
Fire.
Fire.
Oh, so you're already still on the hook? Okay, interesting. Well then, in that case, it's probably not worthy of our time, because I don't know of anybody along Tourniquet Arm clamoring to receive police, fire, fire, Parks and Rec, or road services from municipality.
I don't think there's anybody clamoring, sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
I don't get the impression, I didn't get to the meeting, the other night, the Tourniquet Arm, but I don't get the impression that anybody's clamoring to get services from Anchorage. Because they know what the cost, nobody wants to pay that cost. And I also think though that there is an issue with fire service as well as police service in that gap, especially with all the accidents on that highway. That, who's gonna respond? I guess I saw that, maybe it was at our public safety committee meeting yesterday or somewhere. I recently heard the fire department say that they may, respond, but all they're gonna do is kind of like, hold the scene.
Put cones out.
Yeah, put cones out, So I agree that something needs to be addressed. I think it's inexcusable that we have a section of the municipality that is not serviced by basic public safety services. But it sounds like from what Mr. Falsey said, that while we could do that with police, and if we wanted to do it with fire, we would have to have an adjustment.
Okay, so perhaps we pursue a very narrowly crafted change to state statute that allows extension of fire service without the, shall we say, higher bar established in 90, it was probably 2000 at that point.
Why, Mr. Flynn, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Well, why are you pursuing the fire service one? What impact would that have on Girdwood or Chicago?
Well, ostensibly, it could allow AFD's jurisdiction, the Anchorage Fire Service area, to extend to Girdwood or Birchwood. I don't see that being the goal of this. I think the bigger issue is how do we address the communities along Tourniquet Arm and I don't have a vested interest in this, but currently we have sort of two weaknesses in the system. One, the majority of voters are in the larger existing service area and just say, sorry, we're not gonna help you out. Or two, you could have given the relatively sparse population along that area, you could have a small minority that says, we don't want service, and the rest of you who live in this area can't have it either because we're voting no. And do we wanna give ourselves the flexibility or remove that obstacle from state law and just say, can the majority of voters in a new service area approve the new service area? And I understand why that would be sensitive to your area. That's why I've been trying to tread into this gently.
No, I appreciate the conversation. I'm just going down your logic. I'm trying to measure what impacts potentially could come and how they would come.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't see an interest by AFD to expand all the way to the north and all the way to the south. I think they're comfortable with where they're at. It's how do we best handle, and maybe it's extending Girdwood south, or sorry, Girdwood north to capture some of those smaller communities.
And I think it's probably helpful to remember for some members that may not realize that we're talking about fire, but we do right now have area-wide EMS.
That's true.
There's separate between EMS and fire. So if somebody has a heart attack or something like that, if it's a medical call, there's already area-wide EMS throughout the municipality.
Have we asked them? Has there ever, the speculation, I guess, is that they would reject fire, but do we know that?
Well, I don't think we speculate that. I think we just recognize there's an additional obstacle in the state statute based on that reaction to the extension of the police service area. Mr. Dunbar?
When we're having this conversation, are we really talking about a concern with sort of Birchwood and the communities themselves, or are we talking about the highway in front of them? I mean, so that has been what the sort of has seems to have been dominating the public discussion about the state troopers are pulling out, there's a major accident, who responds, did they clear the road? Is that what we're talking about, or are we talking specifically just about the structures, when we grew up with fire service, the structures in those little communities?
Mr. Evans?
I don't know that we were necessarily talking about the same thing, but I think we're talking about both. I mean, certainly there's a lot of traffic on the highway, that's a big issue. Very sparse population off the highway in that area, with a much more limited likelihood of services. But I think both have to be addressed in some way.
I mean, they're affected on both levels. If something happens and they don't have coverage, then they don't have coverage. But if something happens on the highway, that affects their ability to access the services that they probably want on in their daily lives. And we haven't had a detailed conversation with those communities as to what they want. I just have been wondering, since we're putting together a package, do we want to try and remove at least one of the obstacles to moving forward?
They had the Turnagain Community Council had a meeting last night that I know Mr. Weddleton attended, and I think some folks from the mayor's office may have attended as well. I haven't heard from them what took place, but that may give us a greater insight as to where that group is headed or what they're inclined to do.
Ms. Fleet Green has joined us.
I have. I just at the opportune time. I did attend last night and walked through the history and the current state of play, and the community council seemed to express interest in creating a public safety committee like Girdwood did to try and figure out what the options were. I mentioned to them that you were talking about doing something as well. So they understand that their tax base is very low and would not generate a lot of revenues, but they are interested in exploring options of either creating their own public police services area, going back to the troopers, and putting additional pressure there. But the first step would be that they create their own public safety committee.
Mr. Croft?
Yeah, just on the fire, I think it's too early. We don't know whether they have some other solution, whether they want Girdwood or us, and whether they would agree to it. I mean, essentially what we'd be asking the state is, give us the ability to force them to do things on fire when we don't really even know whether there's it might be that there is a solution that we don't have to force them into. And I'd rather ask for permission to force somebody only after we've exhausted all the other options of maybe seeing if we can come to agreement first.
Mr. Butler?
So getting back to my earlier question, so what they do in those little communities, I don't think is really so I guess I'm asking, are we prevented from doing things on the highway by what
Yes.
those little communities do? Okay, so that's what we're really talking about here. We're not really talking, I mean, certainly Mr. Evans, Mr. Weddleton, they're their constituents and they have a more direct impact. We all care about what happens to everyone in our community, but the big issue really is the highway that runs in front of those communities. So is there any way to extend fire just to the highway and not to the community, and not to the houses right off the highway?
Not
and that
under the
kind of
current
thing?
statutory framework.
Right, and that's really why we're having this discussion, right? Because if they didn't have a major highway right in front of them and they wanted to stay outside the area, we probably would be talking about ways to force them in, correct?
Why couldn't we rewrite the boundaries of the service area?
Yeah, I don't think there is any reason why you couldn't do that. Service area boundaries can be redrawn with a vote. So if you extended the fire or the police service area to encompass no new residential property, only to.
There's no one to
the
vote
highway,
against it.
I think you can do that administratively. If the charter says no voters reside within the area, then you can just do it on affirmative petition of the property owners. The property owners probably the state, they probably just send us a letter and then the boundary would be changed. It wouldn't raise any new revenue and it wouldn't give the fire department or the police department any new capacity. So there's still a lot of downsides to it, but I think it's a theoretical possibility.
Well, if they let us turn it into a toll road at Portage.
There's a
on that stretch.
There's a nifty little thing called state preemption.
Well, if we're willing to take on their stretch of highway. Anyway.
They get federal funds for that, because they're still technically controlling it, and they still get funds for doing that.
I'd assume that was the case.
Okay. All right, well, in discussion, at this point, I don't.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Steele, please.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the biggest nightmare that would keep me awake out there is a major accident on the highway that requires all emergency services, police, fire, and medical, and it closes down the highway, and you got to wait until somebody comes from Homer or from the peninsula to get there to do something. That to me is the big nightmare that hopefully whatever we do tries to solve.
I'm not hearing any excitement about doing anything particular about the issue.
I can just see, we've had a number of accidents over the last few years out there that have just closed everything down, and for hours, if not a day. And to me, if I lived in Girdwood or Portage or somewhere like that, I would, be really inconvenienced, if nothing else.
Okay. Have we beat that horse sufficiently to death?
I think for Mr. Evans, I know we had a brief conversation about this possibly being a topic of your public safety committee, and Attorney and Armed People welcomed that idea as well.
And we'll probably try to arrange our next public safety committee meeting out there on this issue and see what we can generate from that.
We'd manage to have one work session, Girdwood, I think. Okay. Well, is there anything else? Everyone remember their tasks? Do I need to go over them one more time?
Got him this time.
And what's the time frame for us to get back to you, or we get back to the administration for the edits?
I would like you to send them to Ms. Foley, and I will trust her to handle distribution to the administration and to the rest of us.
Can we also ask questions from the administration at this time?
Of course, yeah.
So, Mr. Falsey, and I guess, Mike, we talked a little bit about the E911 thing, about expanding that language a little bit. Do you guys have language to propose? Okay.
Yeah, well, I talked with ACS and GCI and got their interpretation of why the burner phones are not included in the collection right now. And part of it has to do with their inability to collect that surcharge at the point of sale. So
So you're saying that there's nothing statutory at the state level that's preventing us from doing this?
Well, I think I would phrase it that the way the E911 surcharge is set up, it depends on monthly billings, and it's just not in any way set up to get burner phones. So Ona is right. If you had some special municipal tax that was just raising revenue generally, and you wanted to throw that to E911 services, you probably could do that, but it wouldn't really be the E911 surcharge that's municipal wide. And arguably, I need to get a preemption argument that you're doing something above and beyond what the state is doing.
Well, if there is a
The simplest
preemption-
fix, I think, would be to say, let's massage the state law to
Right.
determine
To
these
specifically
two.
expand it,
So
to call it
there.
out.
Okay, great, let's do that then.
Okay.
Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I apologize, I'm not on the legislative committee, and I think I missed the last work session, so I'm actually just coming into this process at this point.
We welcome everybody.
Which is
As you
why I
can
know
tell.
I didn't do the other thing. But, and it may be too late in the game, and that there may not be sufficient interest, but another issue that I personally would like to see the legislature take care of this year is the Uber thing. It's a pretty easy fix. It seems like if the municipality indicated it was behind it, then they give it, sufficient thrust to get it over the line. It's just as I understand it, I don't know the details of where in code it is, but it's just a change in granting Uber and like companies an exemption so that their operators are considered independent contractors, which is exactly what taxi drivers have already.
It's a workers' comp issue.
It's a workers' comp issue, exactly. So, obviously, I'd like to include that. I don't know if that's still something that can be added at this point, but if it is,
I'll get you Pat Carter's contact information. He can direct you to the appropriate line in the statute if you want to draft an amendment, and get it to Rose, hopefully by Tuesday. I'd like to see amendments come in.
okay.
We can take that up.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anything else?
They have to jump into some hoops.
Mr. Steele, anything else from you?
No, that's fine.
Ms.
Thanks for the
Dombrowski?
update.
Ms. Dombrowski, anything from you?
I'm working with Ms. Tucker on an issue, but I don't want to let the cat out of the bag yet. Looking at code, I don't know how much time it'll take me, so
Oh,
nothing
come
yet.
on. Come on, throw another apple of discord on the table.
What? And I was gonna say, don't worry. I was gonna say, I don't think it'll be controversial. Maybe.
All right.
You never know these days.
You never know. Mr. Peterson.
Just thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the community council last night, City Foothills, we had a little bit of a discussion about, our number one priority being asking for about $290 million to rebuild the port. And the question from the audience came, well, so chances of that happening are really slim, so what's the backup plan? And so I guess the question is, what's the backup plan?
I think what we've asked Mr. Cross to work on is a statewide geo bond. Obviously, we have our top priority, but if it's not gonna be, if it's gonna be a $150 million geo bond, then we'll find the appropriate projects to insert into that. I don't think we wanna enumerate them at this point.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, because I had a talk after the meeting with another gentleman on that exact point, and my point was sort of, it's a statewide issue, and Anchorage isn't the one who should develop the contingency plan, the state has to. They are unwilling to help us fund this port that's critical for the whole state. They need to come forward with some kind of contingency plan, whether it's Whittier or Seward or whatever.
As my college
they have not done. What's that?
I've worked all those plans, I can tell you.
And I would like to add, Mr. Pearson, that have no doubt that we are not relying only on this legislative request to find money for the port. We're turning over every rock that we possibly can in order to get money wherever it's available. And Sharon and Jim, I think, can attest to that fact. So it's not the only hope out there.
I just wanted to throw that little anchor out
Yeah.
there. And,
Yeah, okay. Good point, Mr. Pearson, thank you. Anybody else? All right, I believe we have another meeting at June. Oh, work session, okay, so we're adjourned.